Our world is brimming with stories. Every moment, every instant, somewhere, a story is born, a legend woven into existence through the experiences and hardships of man and monster alike. Maybe it is a tale of heroism, or one of devastation and misery. Perhaps it inspires joy, or evokes sorrow. Whatever their flavor may be, stories are the bedrock of culture, history, and humanity itself. Thus, among its many duties, the Hunters Guild also records and collects stories and legends that would otherwise be lost to time. Be it oral reproductions, ancient scrolls, or even the diaries of their own hunters, the guild archives are a treasure trove of tales worth telling. Which is why today, one such story will be presented. This story comes to us from the diary of a guild hunter, a sand warrior from the desert city of Loklak. By and large, there was nothing remarkable about him. A strong hunter, but not much different from his brethren. But what he would witness echoed through the dunes, shaping the fear and reverence mankind holds for the empire of dust and sand. The sandstorm whipped my body endlessly. Just as I had learned, I put one foot in front of the other, carefully but with determination. I had always enjoyed this feeling. The winds ravage me, the elements crash into my flesh, and yet here I stand. It's a powerful sensation, although I find that few outside of Loklak actually appreciate this sentiment. As the wind howled, my thoughts returned home. Ah, Loklak, jewel of the sands. The moment I embarked on my journey 1 full week ago, I already began missing its 2 spires and lively dust roads. What's worse, I realized only after accepting this quest that I will likely still be on the road when the sandstorms hit the city, which means I'll be missing the Moran festival. But this is my job, so no moaning. Or at least, only a little bit. Continuing across the dunes, I endeavored to remind myself of why this journey was good and necessary. Being homesick is dreadful, but as a monster hunter, I do take pride in my contributions to our society. It eases the task, that's for sure. Not long ago, a trade route in northern Sekumea was ravaged, and an important merchant's post was entirely destroyed. Luckily, no one was harmed, as nobody was there to witness the attack. It was discovered after the fact, as the tradesmen returned to the site from their journeys. This makes this a clear case of some monster deciding to enforce its territory, the destruction a show of dominance and power. So, per normal guild protocol, a quest was issued to deal with this mystery monster. Unfortunately, sandstorm season was about to start in the north, which made it particularly hard to find any hunter that could brave this task. The nearest large hunter's city, Tanzia, categorically declined, for example. Which is where I came in, for it is expected that Loklak hunters accept quests gated by sandstorms. After all, Loklak is the only city where hunters are trained to fight even when the sands wail across the air. And just as any missions that require diving are generally sent over to Moga, any quests that might take place during sandstorms are sent our way. A quick chat with the quest maiden later, and I was packing my pouch and was ready to go. While I missed home, the journey really was not that bad. I had spent the last 2 days in Rekusara, the satellite town in North Sekumea that the guild uses as a base of operations for any quests in the area. The people were warm and kind, as most will be given the chance. I used my time there to gather intel on what might expect me out in the sands. From the descriptions of the damage, it sounded like the work of a bloss. Giant horn wyverns, herbivorous and very territorial. Whether it was a monobloss or a diablos, I couldn't say, but frankly it would make no difference. The two are so similar that what works on one generally works on the other. Suddenly, my mind got stuck on something odd. While my time in Rekusara had been quite enjoyable, one moment remained a mystery to me. I had discussed the details of my quest with the local guild master, and, as per usual, had to inform the village elder of where I was headed, for the sake of information parity, and in order to facilitate the recovery of my remains, should it come to that. As I described my task and where I was headed exactly, a shadow fell over the elder's face, and in the end he merely nodded, and then patted my hand, seemingly in consolation. Even under the desert sun, I shiver thinking of it for some reason. As I neared the site of the incident, I made sure to inspect my pouch one more time. Supply chains are a constant issue, and any good hunter will know to prepare a solid and reliable inventory of tools and aids. But it never hurts to check. I wanted to make sure I had everything, and whether or not I needed to gather something from a nearby oasis to stock up. Who knows when I would get the next chance. As I went through my rations and elixirs, I made a point of holding and feeling out my most valuable tool, my sonic bombs. Yes, my sword and my shield will be what actually pierce the monster's hide, but no bloss hunt is complete without the use of these gadgets. A very old guild invention. Take a screamer sack, a bird wyvern organ that produces sound when stimulated, and attach a small amount of gunpowder and a kinetic fuse to it, and voila! A sound grenade that incapacitates any creature that relies on its hearing. It is not quite so simple, however. Learning how to time it for maximum effect takes practice, and most monsters you would use this against will not accommodate multiple attempts. Regardless, an invaluable asset for any quest in the desert. After all, much of the local fauna is adapted to use sound as its guide, listening to the vibrations in the sand. Satisfied with my inspection, I closed my pouch and ventured onwards. Arriving at the destroyed merchant post, itself built into a crumbling desert ruin, I immediately began spotting a few clues. The rough mud in front of the post had held onto a few wyvern tracks, made by feet that were large and heavy, with blunt claws. Certainly the work of a bloss, as I had suspected. The blunt claws are a dead giveaway. Strewn about were pieces of the original ruin, rock and marble bits, collateral victims of the assault. I walked over to where most of these fragments lay, and noticed that a particularly large piece held what I needed. A massive scrape mark. The name bloss refers to a family of wyvern known as horn wyverns, and as the name suggests, they all grow massive horns. This mark was clearly the leftover of such a horn colliding with the rock, perhaps a clumsy charge that didn't have the beast's full force behind it and failed to shatter it entirely. Based on the angle and shape of the mark, I deduced that the horn that had made it was likely curved. This rules out the monoblos, as it only has a single, very straight horn. So unless I was dealing with something entirely new, this was now officially a Diablos hunt. The mark seemed to unfortunately have been fairly marginal. I could make no assumptions about the size, age, or precise species at that time. I was about ready to start looking for more tracks and clues, especially as to where the attacker went, when the sandstorm intensified again. The world became a roaring, disintegrating miasma in which land and sky were reduced to shimmering silhouettes. My training would allow me to still operate in such conditions. I simply had to get my bearings first. As I looked around and took in my surroundings, adapting my face and especially eyes to the screaming torrent of dust, I was struck with the sight of a distant shape. Certainly not of dune-like quality. It seemed as if the sudden storm had unearthed something that had been buried under fresh, light sand. Slowly, I began making my way to it, and before long, I recognized the scaly back and twin horns of a Diablos. It must have been sleeping under the sand, having made the scene of the crime the new center of its territory. Cheeky, I'll give it that. It still seemed to be at rest, so I endeavored to sneak up to it. Every hunter knows that waking a monster up with a strong strike is a powerful move, disorienting and confusing the hurt creature and ensuring easy victory. As I inched closer, my sword ready for the draw, something seemed off. Diablos have massive lungs, and their powerful roars are feared everywhere. Those lungs take equally massive breaths, expanding and contracting the beast's torso quite distinctly. At that distance, I should have been able to see its back move and its wings vibrate, but nothing. Not a single fiber of the Diablos seemed to move. It simply lay there, half buried in the sand, without the faintest movement. Stillness was all there was. I reached the creature and confirmed my suspicion. This Diablos was dead. Its back was turned to me, and I could see no wounds, but standing close to it, I felt the spark of life's absence. Had it died of old age? Comparing its horn curve and the size of the feet that are peeking through behind its pose, it was definitely the creature that had attacked the outpost. An elder, rampaging one final time before succumbing to time's erosion? Unlikely, as this Diablos was just too small for that. It looked to be a healthy adult male. This discovery shook up my quest target somewhat significantly, so I decided to try and identify the cause of death at least. I walked around the corpse to inspect its front and I gasped. For the first time, the sandstorm threatened to knock over my shaking legs. My heart began to race, gently shaking me. The front of the Diablos, its head, chest, and abdomen, were all caked in dried blood. To be expected from a death in nature. What was unexpected was the origin of all that blood. At the beast's upper chest, right under where the neck would begin, a hole had formed, a piercing wound that had caused the creature to perish. But the size of the wound was staggering. The hole was so massive, it had entirely pulverized the Diablos' collarbone and eaten away most of its pectus. Its neck was only half attached. A cannon would not leave such a clean entry, and there certainly weren't any Dragonators around for miles and miles. Such an injury would mean immediate death. This Diablos was killed right here where I was standing, so it didn't just get hurt by a city defense and then walk out to bleed out here. But what on earth could create such a mark? Then it hit me. Looking at the wound, I had to finally recognize what I had been subconsciously blocking out. The wound started off at its maximum circumference, but then gradually narrowed as it got deeper. This had not been produced by a straight projectile or weapon. This was a horn wound, except that whatever horn made it looked to be about twice or even 3 times as large as that of a Diablos. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, my hands, my feet. What could have possibly left a wound like this? As my heart continued to reverberate across my body, I knelt down to inspect the creature further. The destruction of its body had been so brutal, so complete, that there wasn't much more information to be gained. Absent-mindedly, I let my fingers trace across the massive dead carapace, running through the hard scales and wet blood, feeling my heart pound at my fingertips, caressing the... Wait. Wet? I froze. A second passed, and my senses confirmed my initial perception. What I had thought was dried blood was, in fact, only partially dried. There were still patches of semi-liquid blood all around the wound and even further down the dead Diablos' chest, which meant that it had not died too long ago, which meant that the attacker was... Before the thought could complete, I finally noticed the last thing. The last thing that should have been bothering me. My body was rumbling with the beat of my heart. But my heart is just a small muscle, no larger than my fist. It should not be able to shake me like this. No. Underneath the beating of my heart lay a second rhythm. Slower. Deeper. Not centralized at my chest, but coming from the ground beneath me. The beat that was shaking me and the earth beneath me were footsteps. I didn't think, I simply acted. Propelled by the most ancient of instincts, I cowered behind the Diablos corpse, hiding away from the direction the tremors seemed to be coming from. The steps were slow, but if this truly was the beast that had perished as Diablos, then a single one of its massive steps could cover a massive distance. It could be upon me any second. As I scrambled to open up my pouch and ready my sword, I decided to peek out from behind the corpse. A decision I regretted immediately. There it was. Behind the thick veil of the raging sandstorm, a shadow was beginning to form. Slowly, then more rapidly. I was petrified. I should have hidden again immediately, but I could not take my eyes off this enormous, swelling shadow. How much larger would it grow? It didn't seem to have an end. Then, I caught a glimpse of its face, and again, my body acted on its own, instantly retreating back behind the corpse, my lifeless lifeline. I had seen its face. Behind a curtain of sand, 2 eyes, glowing like red suns, had met my gaze. I had been able to make out a few more facial features, vague visualizations my mind was rejecting at the time. The distance between the eyes, the curved tusks, the shadowy hood behind the face. My suspicion gnawed at me and, taking a deep breath, against my better judgment, I took another peek. I was right. There, now standing close enough to be fully visible, was a Diablos. Except it was unlike any Diablos I had ever seen. Its carapace was a deep crimson red from the tip of its horns all the way down to its wing membranes. But the color wasn't what struck me with awe. It was its size. Based on just what I could see, it seemed to be about 2, maybe 3 times as large and massive as even the largest recorded Diablos. A single one of its horns was the size of a small wyvern, and its hind legs were like pillars, holding up a temple of heresy. It was in fact so big that I didn't feel like it should have been able to move. But move it did. Having now gotten fairly close to my hiding spot, the massive red wyvern halted and looked around. It had not noticed me. It seemed that it was still very much a Diablos, terrible eyesight included. Hunching back behind the dead, much smaller Diablos, I weighed my options. Reporting back to the guild would take too long, but I also couldn't let this behemoth roam around unattended. A creature this large doesn't need malice to cause harm. Mountain dragons are, for example, dangerous simply because they destroy anything they walk past due to their sheer size. If this Diablos decided to venture near a settlement, the result would surely be pandemonium. I will need to deal with this myself and... My body broke out in a cold sweat. A gust of wind had begun grazing my neck, hot and wet. From the corner of my eye, turning my head ever so slightly, I looked upon what I instinctively recognized as my death sentence. The wind at my neck was a breath. The massive Diablos had decided to inspect the corpse of its past victim closer, and its head was now very close to my body. Being near it, its size was finally terribly apparent to me. Its tusks were as long as my body, and its horns may as well have been a city wall. The idea of fighting it head-on, which had seemed so reasonable mere moments ago, had now vanished into absurdity. I would not win. It would not even be a fight. One move from this titan, and I'd be reduced to a stain upon the heartless desert. How had it found me? Then I realized. My heart was racing. I was sat on the ground. My heartbeat was vibrating against the sand, while I was hiding from a creature that senses the world through vibrations in the sand. Had my fear given me away? I couldn't be sure. The Diablos seemed more curious than alert, so maybe it was only faintly perceiving me. Slowly, I reached into my pouch and began unpacking my sonic bombs. I would detonate them and buy myself a window to safely escape. I would post a siege quest, ask Loklak to mobilize our forces and... Wait. Hold on. Why was I assuming these sonic bombs would work? They have been reliable with normal Diablos, but what if this massive Crimson Demon had a higher tolerance to them? Then these bombs would be the lever of my guillotine, simply enraging the monster towards me. What do I do? One shot, and if it doesn't work, I'm dead. Oh gods. Diablos are known to scream when starting conflict, and a regular Diablos roar can stun a human adult easily. At this distance, and with lungs that large, this Crimson Diablos' scream would very possibly rupture my eardrums or even liquefy my brain. It wouldn't need to attack. The moment it notices me, my life would be forfeit. My eyes shut in despair. What could I do? Had I been dead ever since I walked into this king's territory? Living on borrowed time? Was there no way out? I tried to keep my composure, but my mind was flooded with images of the dead Diablos I was cowering against. its life snuffed out through a hole the size of my own body. What would those horns do to me? Would there be anything left of me? Was I to return to my mother in a small box? Oh gods, The back of my neck felt cool. Why did it feel cool? The breath had subsided. Carefully, I peeked around and saw that the massive head was gone. Dumbstruck, I arched my head further and further back until I couldn't help myself and fully turned around and looked up from my hiding spot. I just about managed to watch a gargantuan tail tip, similar in size to a small city gate, disappear into the sandstorm. The Crimson King was now, once again, a shadow upon the curtain of dust, now becoming ever smaller, more distant. The enormous Diablos had left. Confused, I walked around to inspect the corpse and noticed that the sand in front of it had shifted slightly. Did the giant Diablos come to apologize to its victim? Or is that too humanizing? I was beset by a great, uncanny emotion. I had sat there, thinking only of violence. The violence I was to do upon the creature, and the violence it would inflict on me in return. But it seemingly never actually shared that thought with me. This behemoth, older than perhaps my entire lineage, had looked at me without seeing me. I couldn't begin to imagine its intentions, and I doubt I will ever be able to. My feelings of violence and victory mattered not to a creature so large and wise. I had met a forgotten emperor of the sands, and I had spent my audience cowering and thinking of blood and death. I began making my way home. As I looked back, I saw my sword. I had plunged it into the sands in front of the dead Diablos, my savior and my anchor. I had no intentions of retrieving my weapon. I would need it no more. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know what you thought. This is a new series kind of thing that I'm experimenting with, and if you guys enjoy it, let me know and I'll make more of it. A very special thank you, of course, to all of our patrons, including Fiction Ape, Sini, Claire Meboon, Drexian, Geo, Jameson Tate, Makoto 2, Mr. Pyramid, Mr. Meander, Pere Fuego, Pero Scoco, Person 212, Project Iceman, Vulgar Beast, Oakwood Tree, Iron Camel, and Courage. I'll see you all next time. Be safe and stay well, my friends.